Hello and welcome to Among the Lilies. This is a show for ladies who are tired of pretending and are ready to be real. And today I have my wonderful friend Margaret with me. Margaret, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah. Why don't you go ahead and tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Well,
Don't worry, we have plenty of time.
Uh-oh.
Oh no.
Well, that was
I gotta shut down.
Well, that was a really short show.
Leave page. I'm so sorry. Okay, there we go. Okay.
So just keep going.
Yeah, keep going.
Okay,
Just ignore that. Sorry, everyone. I'm learning how to do this, and I had the YouTube channel page open. I shouldn't
I
have
just
done
thought it was
that.
going to be like an exceptionally short show. Right. So I'm from coastal Georgia and came up to Steubenville, Ohio in 1987, got an undergrad in theology. Long, winding route, but eventually came back and did a master's in counseling, honestly, because I had been in counseling so long myself and nobody could figure out what was wrong with me. And so I thought, well,
I'll figure it out
time
myself.
to figure it out myself. Yes. So I'll live on student loans instead of disability because I couldn't hold down a job because I was such a mess. And so I never went to school to become a therapist. It was like became a therapist by accident, right?
I love that.
Yeah,
Do you know one of our good friends, when he was youth minister with Matt back in the day, well, before Matt and I got married, and his wife was so sick, and it was the same. They kept trying to figure out, and he became a doctor.
Oh, wow.
Mainly to help his wife.
Yeah. Somebody's
Diagnose
gotta figure
her.
this out. Yeah. I'm motivated for this. I may as well be the one. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was really just trying to buy time and ended up halfway through my master's in counseling program, going through an intensive method of trauma therapy. And it was night and day difference. And so before that, I thought in good conscience, I can't become a therapist because I don't believe it works. And after that, I thought, well, I can't not become a therapist because
it
it's
works.
my obligation. So I ended up doing that over the last 16 years with really like clients of all ages and all walks. And
What is the youngest?
wonderful.
So when I hear clients of all ages and walks, I don't picture as large as yours.
Yeah.
Like I'm like,
The
oh
range.
yeah, here's the range.
Right.
So tell us youngest, oldest.
Yeah, youngest 2 years and 4 months.
Okay.
Yeah, and oldest is 82.
Okay. And
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 everywhere in
pre-verbal. You can do pre-verbal.
Yeah, it's really amazing. That's actually my favorite population, so I'll get all excited talking about that because as long as they have receptive language.
Okay.
Meaning like,
They can understand.
if you eat your vegetables, you can have a popsicle, right? If they can understand that, then they're appropriate for therapy because they're more on the receiving end of what I'm doing with them. I'm really getting their history from social worker, foster parents, or parents, as the case might be. And so they just really need to be able to take in what I'm doing with them. But their brains are so plastic. They're so being formed at that age that it's just super cool because the changes that happen are like at light speed. They're at light speed because they don't have all of the years of like a malformed identity. I'm just really flawed and fundamentally broken, or all the different addictions that people end up with as they're trying to self-medicate for their pain. And so it's really neat because they'll just change, really drastically in like an hour and a half, and then the parents are expecting them to behave or respond in the same ways as before, and the parents are the ones who are like, whoa, they're having to like adjust, So it's really cool.
What a gift.
It's my favorite.
Yeah, that's so good. Because I think especially with older people, like I'm always shocked when I have someone that's older sharing their heart with me or saying like this trauma that they've experienced. And like even as they're talking about it, it's so painful. They're talking about something when they were 5 years old.
Yeah.
And they're like 60, 70 years old.
Yeah.
And it's like that pain is just as real now as when they were 5.
Yeah.
But they won't have that quick, or maybe they can. I don't know. You're the expert.
Yeah.
But like,
the trauma itself can be processed, but a lot of times there's years of carrying negative identity, kind of thing that it takes a longer process, right, for that negative identity to kind of catch up with the truth of who they are than it would for a 2-year-old, 2.5-year-old.
Yeah, I love the idea of being able to just process and look at, okay, what's going on here? What's the lie? And what's from very young. Yeah, I don't think I realized that you could help that young. Like I think my thing that I realized through having kids is like, if the kids acted up, I feel like my husband would instantly be like, oh my goodness, they hate me and they want me to have a horrible night's sleep.
Sure.
I was like, no, 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 that's not what's going on. There's something wrong with them and they don't know how to communicate. So them crying or whatever, they're letting us know something's wrong.
Yeah.
So we just got to figure it out. Like, we're going to feed them. We're going to change the diaper. We're going to rock them. We're going to do all the things and try to, like, they just don't have the words to tell us.
Right. The way I kind of look at that is because the right side of the brain is the more emotional side. It's the most closely connected to the limbic system, which is the emotional center of the brain. So my little shorthand Southern way of remembering that back in the beginning was, if somebody's not acting like they're in their right mind, they're probably in their right brain.
Okay. Oh, I like that.
And so it helps you to not take things personally.
Yeah,
right?
you're just
and
acting in the right.
Escalate yourself.
Right.
Okay, this isn't about me. This is about some emotional thing they've been through in the past.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. Okay, so you were studying at school mainly to help
figure myself out.
Figure yourself out.
Just buy time.
Yeah.
Right. I really wasn't looking to become a therapist, but.
And did you see multiple different therapists or?
Oh, mercy. Yeah. I'd been in counseling from the time I was 17 and at that point was 33. So it had been, and I mean, I was the faithful client. I really was like really motivated, really engaged. I would pay out of pocket for like a good therapy before I would buy food because I thought like I would rather be sane and hungry than crazy and have a full belly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No,
that felt
fair.
like I had to like pick. And so I had been through a lot of therapists, a lot of telling all the different stories of different traumas I'd been through over and over again. And hospitalized a couple of times, misdiagnosed bipolar, on every medication under the sun, titrated up, titrated down, and combined with different things. And then finally went through the method of trauma therapy that I was trained in, and then ended up honing it and adjusting it over all the years. But went through that, and it was a drastic difference, which I didn't expect it to be because it wasn't like I was walking around thinking about those things.
When did you notice that you had a drastic change?
Honestly, in some ways, the first day, because the first day of a 2-week intensive, and it was because I'd really been imminently suicidal, like every conscious moment for the 18 months before going for intensive. And I remember the first day, at the end of the day, kind of back in the hotel room and trying to, because I was there from out of town, and trying to assess, like, am I suicidal or not? And realizing, oh, to heck with it. Like, I'm too tired. I'll figure it out tomorrow.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So there was already like a big shift from just that morbid depression.
Yeah.
To,
yeah. Did you feel like the dark cloud had like just lifted enough that you could, I don't know, be more focused on going to sleep than dealing with it?
Yeah. And enough to get my buy-in in the process for the rest of a couple of weeks. Like, wait, this is different. You know? Yeah.
And then were you one-on-one with someone through it, or was it a class being taught?
No, the way they did it, they had a team of clinicians who would kind of tag team in and out to work with you. Yeah.
Okay. Nice. Okay. And then at what point did you realize, okay, this is what I want to do?
It was, I mean, by the end of, I don't even know if it was like, it may have very well been somewhere in the middle of those 2 weeks. Definitely by the end of the 2 weeks, it was like, I'm sold, lock, stock, and barrel, because
I need to tell everyone about this. This is huge.
Yeah.
And then it also is a lot shorter of a time. I mean, it's intensive. So it's...
Yeah, it was all day, every day.
Yeah.
Monday through Friday.
But that's a lot. But to hear from someone, okay, because I don't know, I think oftentimes with therapy, it's like you need to come once a month for the next 5 years.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, I can do that. But it's like, okay, you're going to come every single day, all day for 1 week or 2 weeks. Like, that does seem more like, if you think about, okay, there's going to be light at the end of this 1 week or 2 weeks. I don't know. For me, I think maybe it's more like just my personality too. I'm like, give me that. Let's go hard. Let's figure this out, persevere through, and then find the...
Yeah, no, I agree. I was always an athlete in college, and I always used to ask the therapist I was seeing before that, like, can't we just have one marathon session and just blow through all of this? Because I always use the analogy of a toilet. I felt like a toilet, and I would show up to my session, my weekly session, and they would get the plunger out and like plunger all this stuff up, And right when it was like hovering right at the brim, it'd be like, oh, look at the
time to go.
Let's reschedule you. And like, how can I like walk and this not all slosh all over my life? And how do I make it through until a week, you know, when I come back? And then the same process all over again, right? And so I was always just saying, can't we just have one big marathon session and get through this? And
even if it's going to overflow, even if it's going to flood the whole bathroom,
right?
Hot poop everything, get her done.
Get her done.
Yes, totally.
Yeah, and she'd say, it's not like sports. You can't just play through the pain. But she wasn't a trauma therapist,
right.
you know, so she didn't understand. And so then she actually came down and shadowed them working with me the last 2 days of the intensive. And we sat with one of the people who ended up becoming my mentors. And he was saying, no, it actually is like that. Like it's trauma to the body or to the mind, I guess you'd say, is like poison is to the body. So we're just like, get this out of here, get this out of here. And so if you look at trauma symptoms in that way, like flashbacks, nightmares, intrusive thoughts, it's kind of like if you had a splinter, right? And your body's like trying to push it to surround it with white blood cells and, you know, get this out of here. It doesn't belong. So I think it's kind of, it makes people seem that much more, like the whole process of trauma seem less pathological.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's actually like tending towards health. It's just really difficult when you don't know what to do when you're having the intrusive thoughts and flashbacks and nightmares.
Right.
Yeah.
And not having someone that's willing to hold your hand through it, you know, or guide you through it. Because like once, especially, I mean, all trauma I feel like is ugly, but especially when you have layers and layers of trauma. And have you ever worked with someone and felt like, okay, I can't actually help you, like there's too much here?
Not because of it being too much.
Or is it more them not being willing to
Yeah, it was
pull
like,
it all out?
Or not even recognizing like one person had come because of an ultimatum from their spouse.
Oh, okay.
And so it wasn't really engaged.
It's not them.
And it was, and another person, it was just, it's people not engaging in the process, right?
Yeah.
So lack of awareness or lack of motivation or fear for whatever reason.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Yeah, because you can't, it doesn't matter what you're trying to do, whether you're trying to deal with trauma or lose weight or get healthy, if you're not willing to help yourself or you're not willing to go through the process. Yeah.
Right.
You can have the
best
best person in the world by your side and they can't do it for you.
Right. Yeah. Which is frustrating because you wish you could get them over the hump and get them past that. But I think that's the beauty of free will, that we really do get to be, we get to collaborate with that process.
Yeah.
You know?
And what do you find, you said all walks of life as well. So do you find like, okay, in this economic background or in this, is there certain things where you're like, I'm more likely to see these traumas or those traumas, or is it all?
Yeah, no, you know, when I first started, I think I kind of had this preconceived idea that wealthy people wouldn't have certain problems or certain experiences, and then just like quickly realized like,
oh, that's not true.
No respecter of persons. Like trauma is no respecter of persons. Yeah. It really doesn't matter.
Yeah. What have been some of your like favorite aha moments? I know you can't obviously tell us about individual clients' details, but like what are some stuff that you're like, okay, here's an example of this person, walking them through and seeing, because I think sometimes people can think like, okay, there's no hope for me. Like, I'm so glad you got help, but my trauma is so much greater or mine's so much worse.
Yeah. Which is actually, that's the spot I was in. So like, because I had tried so many things over the 16 years that I had been in therapy. So even when people were saying, no, this is really effective, I think, well, I'm sure it works for other people, but it won't work for me because nothing else has. You know? Yeah. Gosh, so many different examples come to mind because I can share details as long as I change the identifying information.
Yes.
So I think to share specific stories. I mean, I'll just go with this one because we're talking a little bit about pre-verbal. So it was a big learning lesson for me, and I guess that's why it stuck with me. So there was a family who had a son, I want to say around 7 or 8, whatever, somewhere around in that age. And they didn't think they could have any more kids. And so they had 2 little kids in their home in the foster process, foster to be adopted. And the one was 3-year-old little girl, and her little brother was either 18 months or 15 months old. And but then the couple did get pregnant, and so now they had a newborn in the home, and the 3-year-old kept trying to kill the baby.
Oh.
Like kill the baby, not like, and we have to teach toddlers like, no, honey, be gentle. Like, this was like homicidal intent,
Yeah.
Like mom would turn her back to making a cup of tea, to throw the tea bag away, and the 3-year-old would have a pillow over the baby's face, like trying to suffocate her,
oh, goodness.
like, or trying to drag the little, if the baby was still in the little seat, like trying to drag it to the stairs to push it down or things like that. So, so the social worker who was working with that family wanted, obviously would want this kid to get help anyway, but especially it was threatening the placement. And there's a real shortage of foster placements. And so, and the family did want to still adopt the children, but obviously they couldn't.
Not if they're going to.
Their own child, right?
We love this kid, and we want to keep it, but if it's going to try to kill other kids.
We can't put our own child in foster placement to take in these kids. And so she was trying to talk the county into letting me work with the little girl. And the county said, this was up in Summit County in Akron, Ohio. And the county said, that's ridiculous. You can't treat someone that age. And the social worker said, well, this person can. And they said, no, it's not possible. And she said, well, it's going to cost you more to move the children.
Oh, nice.
And they're like,
why not
so
pay
it was
for
the bottom
therapy?
line, right?
Yeah.
It was the bottom line. They're like, okay, we'll give it a shot. And so as I was working with this little girl, I think we kind of all, the social worker, the caseworker, the foster parents, myself, I think we were all kind of under just kind of general idea that the little 3-year-old was jealous because she had gone through extreme neglect. Mom was drug addicted and dad was in the wind and whatever. And so she was seeing this newborn get what she had never gotten, right? And so you go, okay, there's probably some jealousy there. Not that you fault her for it, but just understanding. And it was totally not that, because what ended up happening as I was processing traumas with, they're part of processing traumas with anybody of any age. You just do it in different ways, but is an integration component. So you're getting the part of the person who's suffered with the negative emotion, the burden of what they've gone through, caught up with the wise self, the true self, kind of part of them. And so that's a really abstract idea. And so the way you do that with tiny little people is in a really concrete way, right? Because their thinking is very concrete. Right. And so I had a little baby doll. And so after doing some work on the traumas, we'll call the little girl Shelly. And so I picked up the baby doll and said, but Shelly's safe now. She's safe, and I'm stroking the baby doll, like trying to model for her, like this is how you care for that part, because fundamentally what you're trying to do is to get the person to embrace that vulnerable part of themselves. Yeah. And so then I offered her the baby doll because I wanted her to do that. When I offered her the baby doll, she goes, no, and whacks the baby doll out of my hand. It goes flying across the room. I'm sitting there thinking, what now? What now? They don't
that didn't quite work
for that. And I thought, well, I think as females, we have such a visceral response to babies crying. Yeah. Right. And so I started making a baby crying sound, right? It started going, wah, wah. Now I'm sitting on the floor, right? And so I'm about eye level with her. And when I started making a crying sound, her eyes got as big as saucers. And she came over and covered my mouth. And she's going, no, really vehemently, and I'm still going, wah, wah, until finally she went over and picked up the baby doll. And so I stopped making the crying sound. Okay. And so she threw the baby doll back down. So I started making the crying sound again, right? So we're in kind of this like tennis match, this volley going back and forth. Because what I wanted her to connect, when you embrace that part, then
the baby will
calms
cry
and soothes, And so, in real time right there, that went on for about 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes. Finally, she had the baby doll and she was sitting and stroking it. And that day she stopped trying to kill her baby sister. Yeah. And so what I took away from that was it didn't have anything to do with her baby sister. It had to do with with herself. Because once she could get to a place of compassion for herself, then she could get to a place of compassion for her sister. Makes sense?
Okay. Yeah.
Right? Because baby's what are newborns, but like raw vulnerability.
Yeah.
And what she had gone through had taught her, we do not do vulnerability.
Yeah.
It is
Do not
cool.
cry. Do not
Right?
cry. You will get
Yeah.
hurt. You will
Right.
get.
Right.
Oh,
Stuff those
interesting.
feelings, like
Yeah.
whatever. You know, and then about a year later, I had a case that I felt like confirmed that for me, because they were identical twin little boys, and who were 12, adopted also from a foreign country, and the one had been trying to kill the other for the last 6 years. The parents couldn't let him out of their sight, and so I just kept thinking, well, you know, I grew up with all brothers, and so like, okay, you know, siblings can be annoying. You know, there must be something about his brother that's, you know, kind of driving him crazy. So, because I thought it only makes sense to work with the aggressive one first.
Yeah.
Right? Stop this from going on. And so I was working with him. I was asking, you know, did your brother just kind of like, does he make you nuts? Like, does he just really get on your nerves? And he's like, no.
He hates himself.
And
his brother looks like him. Is that it?
Yeah. So it was the end of the day on Tuesday. The mom comes in to pick him up, and I had never seen the other one. And mom said, oh, I just got their school pictures. Do you want to see their school pictures? And I was honestly thinking, why do I need to see them? They're identical twins. but I know you don't say that to a mom.
Yeah, yeah. You're like, sure, I'd love to see their photo.
Sure. And so she showed me the picture, and what I didn't know was that the other one had some developmental problems. And so they were identical twins, but he very much looked like a kid who would be a target on the playground. So he looked very much like this kid, and yet like a really, really vulnerable version of him.
Okay,
you know?
Interesting.
And still at that point, it didn't dawn on me. It was the next morning I was getting ready. One of the benefits of when I was doing intensive was that, like you have
time
only
to think
that.
outside of
yeah, that's all that's rolling around in the hopper for the week. So I was getting ready that morning and thinking, Lord, what is going on with this case? Like, he seems so sincere and just so a matter of fact that his brother doesn't really bother him. And it felt like the Lord like rolled the top of my head back like a sardine can and like put that first case right back in my mind. And I was like, oh my goodness, it's the same thing. Yeah. And so I went in and really focused on his compassion for himself, and he stopped trying to kill his brother. Yeah. Wow. So those were like huge aha moments that then I saw them once you see it, you can't not see it, and it's everywhere, and it's not just kids, right? Yeah. We all do that. Yeah,
and you don't have to have a twin to struggle with self-hatred.
Right.
You just don't necessarily have that outlet where it's kind of more obvious.
Yeah. And Aquinas says what's received is received according to the mode of the receiver. Right? So if our mode is vulnerable is not acceptable, I'm not lovable, whatever, then anybody else is going to be a threat to that, and we're going to try to squash it, or it's going to make us feel really inferior or whatever. So yeah, it's really fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It's really interesting. I think that we're having a whole, well, I don't know. I think that everyone's talking more about trauma and more about healing and more about mental illness. And do you find that too?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I've been doing this I had done it for, I've just switched.
And it was quiet and you don't talk about it. And it stays behind a closed door.
You're a trauma therapist? Like,
what is that?
Is that like a physical therapist? You're like, no, not that kind of trauma, No, I felt like Rudolph. Nobody lets me join in any reindeer games.
Yes.
Like the whole field has no clue what I'm doing. But anymore.
Now it's kind of, So why? Do you think it was COVID that made it? Or what? Or when do you, because your finger's more on this pulse than mine, but I feel like, wow, everybody's talking about trauma. Everybody's talking about needing inner healing. And I think it's good. Mm-hmm. I mean, we all need healing.
Sure.
But we have retreats now. We have parish missions. We have more therapists. Right. We have more insurance covering these things. And what do you think?
Yeah, I think it has taken some time for the field to catch up, because honestly, I think it took some time for colleges and universities to catch up.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like number of years, like when I went through, like the vast majority, if not almost exclusively what I learned postgraduate, after my master's in counseling, didn't have a class in trauma when I was working on my master's. So it was only outside of it that I gained all this, all the experience in my practicum and everything. But so the vast majority at that point of counselors, social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists hadn't had a class in trauma, and so really just didn't have any training. And so at least the majority, right? And I think it's typical for when we go into a helping profession, we want to help people. And so if we don't feel equipped to do that, what I've seen of professionals over the years is like they'll like shy away from the whole topic of trauma because they feel like, I don't want to bring this up because I don't know what to do with it. And the person's going to be in all this pain. And so I think as schools have begun to have classes in trauma and people have felt a little more equipped. And
okay. But
maybe it was 9/11 that put that more on the radar for
that's fair.
More school shootings, more into people keep talking about trauma.
Yeah, that's true. That is very true. 9/11 for sure. And I think just not that people are more okay with brokenness now, but I remember like when I was a kid, it was like, suck it up, princess. You just move on. Yeah. And like, you don't talk about this. You don't. It's
very stigmatized.
It was very stigmatized, right? And like, you don't want to be someone that needs to go to a therapist or needs therapy. Like it was like a bad word kind of, you know? Right. And now I feel like, I don't know. I feel like it's almost gone the opposite extreme. Where it's like, what do you mean you don't have a therapist? Like, okay, well, you at least have a life coach, right? Like, you have someone that's walking you through.
I do think I always thought, like, when I got into the field, like, that it was kind of crazy. At that point, it was 2006. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm not going to participate in that. Like, I'll share my story if I need to in order to, or at least that I'd been through therapy or whatever, because I thought it was ridiculous that it was 2006 and it was still stigmatized. I'm like, that's nuts. If somebody breaks their leg and they go to the hospital to get it set, you wouldn't be like, oh, you went to the hospital.
Oh my goodness, why did you go to the hospital? It was that bad. You couldn't handle it. You couldn't handle it. Nobody does that. It's like, you have a broken leg. Of course you go to the hospital.
Right. So maybe part of what's like destigmatized it is understanding more and more like the biological nature of trauma.
Okay, yeah, I bet that's true. It's the same with when Matt first started giving talks on pornography. Like in the very beginning, they're like, I'm sorry, you want to talk on what? Okay, could you just give a chastity talk? And you can maybe address that, but could you not use the P word as you address it? And he's like, okay. And then now it's like, well, probably like 5 years ago, it was like, please, we want to talk on porn. And it's like masturbation. Yes, we're going to talk about these things and get it out in the open. It's like, wow, that happened. Like, don't say those words. We're having a whole talk, like at a big conference or and then like it didn't really matter anymore. Right. Like I think we just got past the stigma.
The words.
Yeah, the words. Yeah, they're not big, scary. We can actually have this conversation. Yeah. What do you? I have so many different directions I want to go. But I love I love being able to like, okay, like, let's look at this, let's address it. So someone that's listening, that's like, okay, I've been through mega trauma. Like, what do you recommend for them? That's like, if they're watching and they're listening and they're like, okay, this is good. What do I do?
Yeah. At this point, that's hard for me to answer.
I know.
Because I've just switched what I'm doing. So I would... I'm in conversation with some. Hopefully, I'll have somebody to refer people to. So you can check my website for that as that unfolds. But I say finding a trauma therapist. You have to go through the process of kind of vetting them and that kind of thing. But for sure, like one, knowing that trauma can be processed, right, and that it doesn't have to be decades of your life. And even the process of healing doesn't have to be decades long. And from that, having like drawing the courage to work on things. Yeah. I spoke to somebody recently who knows they need to be doing trauma work and, expressed that they were scared of getting better. And like better's better.
Why?
That's why they call it that. So I think it's a fear of the unknown.
Okay. Like a fear of like, if I open up this can, like there's no putting it back type of thing.
I don't even think it was the process. I think it was the actual getting better. It was like, what does that look like? And
oh, wow.
Which I couldn't relate to. I did
not.
Like,
no, I'm like, I desperately want to be better. What do you want me to do? Right. Sure. Like, I will do it.
Right. I felt like a bear with their leg stuck in the trap. I was ready to like chew my leg
Yeah,
off.
like I'll do it if I need to chew.
Right.
I wonder if that is more. I also have more of like an athletic background,
Okay.
so I wonder if that makes us
Right.
that much different because we're
Maybe.
like willing to do the discipline,
Right.
willing to do the work,
Yeah.
and like
And if you do, then it's going to pay off, even if
Yeah.
you don't know what is beating this team
Right.
look like. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
It sure beats losing to them.
yeah, it does. Yeah, it's. I feel like that when someone brings up like, well, have you thought about cutting out sugar? Are you kidding me? Yes,
Right.
I did think about it,
Right,
and
right.
I did it. They're like,
Yeah,
I know it
yeah.
can be really hard. Or
Right,
cut out
right, right.
gluten. I'm like,
Yeah.
I haven't had gluten in like
Yeah.
12 years.
Right.
Like I was gluten free
Yeah.
before it was cool to be gluten free.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
I'm not. I'm like I'm willing to do the thing,
Right.
but don't
Just tell me what
the thing is.
Yeah.
And I'll try all the things and the
Yeah.
juggling and the but having the having the ability to do that. I was praying recently with a good friend of mine. She does more like TPM, theophostic type stuff, and she's a dear friend of mine because we've been like really close. I've known her longer than I've known my husband, and we go way back, and she's one of my kids' godmothers, and she's just lovely. And she came in town recently just because I wasn't doing well, my health, and she's like, let's just get away. So her and I got an Airbnb and like just went and prayed, and it was so great. We would like just do our own personal morning prayer, and then we come together, chat and pray, and just like dive in, and the Lord would like bubble up stuff, and I'm like, oh my goodness, what is all this stuff? And then we'd like process it, and then it was fine. I'm like, that's not a big deal.
Right.
Like that's so funny that I thought that was such a big deal.
Yeah.
And it was so like eye-opening after the fact to be like, why was I so afraid of that?
Yeah.
And like this fear of like, oh my goodness, if this comes out, it's a big scary. And it's like inviting Jesus into it, and it's like, oh, that wasn't scary at all.
Yeah. Like, I totally agree. It's actually something that we talked about on my podcast recently, and that's that healing should, I think, be like a normal part of like our prayer time. Like I remember Father Mike Scanlon had written a book shortly after I came to Franciscan as a freshman, and it was called Appointment with God. And it was talking about kind of the four main areas of a daily prayer time would be repentance and praise and worship and intercession and what was the fourth one? I think listening to the Lord. And you can tell I don't listen well. I'm like, what's the fourth one?
Like it's one of that. It's the last one. It's hard to get to. You're like, I got to 1 and 2,
right.
sometimes 3.
Probably fell asleep after that. Woke back up. Wait, what am I supposed to be doing? But I think healing should get thrown in there because, in scripture it says like every day has troubles enough of its own. And we kind of do get bumped and bruised like along the way.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
So I think if we normalize healing as a process, then it doesn't have to be like this big scary monster that we kind of have to set aside decades for,
Yeah. I think even in the moment, like finding out even with kids, like when they have like an overreaction to something, and it's like, okay, like let's look at that. Like, why did you get so upset? Like, what were you feeling? And you're like, well, I felt this, and because of this, that, and you're like, okay, it's not even about this situation.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, you felt like that because of this thing over here. Like, let's look at that. Why did you feel that way? All right, let's invite Jesus into that. Let's ask for some healing from that. Like, and then also trying to prevent that from happening again. Because I feel like our natural thing is knock it off, don't yell like that. And it's like, that doesn't help anything.
Yeah.
That's like telling the kid, just bury it deep down inside and don't let it show again. You're like, I'm shoving it all the way down. And the next time it's going to blow up again. And it's like, okay, isn't it just so much easier to be like, let's just pull that out and look at it?
Yeah.
Because I think often when we do, we're like, okay, that's not as big and bad as we thought.
Right.
But let's find healing there. Like, Jesus, help us see this differently. Help us. And then I think also forgiving. Like, we're really big on making our kids, like when they hurt the other, you need to say, I'm sorry. Like, it's fine. I'm like, no, it's not fine. They hurt you. They're saying sorry. Please forgive me. Mm-hmm. Can you forgive them?
Right.
And like actually going through that process and using the words, I forgive you.
Yeah. And
then actually forgiving them.
Right. And forgiving ourselves too.
Yes.
That's a huge place people get stuck a lot of times. Yeah. How beautiful, like, to be able to look at emotions as information. Yeah. Right? Instead of like, oh, they're really scary, and so I have to stuff them and like la 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 la, don't listen to them or medicate for them later in life or whatever. But like, oh, it's information. So what's that information telling me? But it's only one source of information, right? Yeah. There's also, God's word or what people I trust are saying to me about the situation or whatever, and the I of me can weigh in all of that information. So emotions are just a piece of that, but they're not a piece I have to be scared of. I can take in that information, assess it, and then make an appropriate response.
Yeah. And I think that we are living in a world in which the emotion is the only thing we're listening to.
Yeah.
And if you bring up an emotion in me, then you have to apologize,
right.
because this emotion is huge. And like, you can't argue with my emotion, and my truth is my truth type thing. And it's like, whoa, like when did we give, I don't know. I feel like when I was a kid, we didn't give emotions anything.
Right.
Like, we're like, whatever, that's just how you're feeling. That doesn't matter. This is the truth.
Right.
Which is not healthy. Like, I don't think that was good. But I also don't think it's good to say the emotion is king. Yeah. We don't have to go all that way. And especially with the,
it went from like, I think, therefore I am, to like, I feel, therefore I am.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, I actually had this conversation with a young adult in at least the last couple of years, and said, you are not your emotions. And you should have seen the like look of shock on the face, like trying to like assimilate that information.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So I do think it's a little bit different than when us old people were
right.
kids.
Yeah.
And social media and agendas and everything. Right?
Yeah.
You have to be responsible for my emotions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what a burden to place on me.
Right.
Like, I'm sorry, I could barely be responsible for my own emotions, let alone my little people around me, let alone the people in my like 5-foot radius. But I can't be responsible for everyone everywhere on Twitter and Facebook and anywhere else. Like, that is not. Yeah. And that's such a giant me monster too. And it's like, that's not going to make you healthy at all.
Yeah. Because you never end up growing into a sense of self.
Yeah.
Right? Because now my peace and contentment is contingent on not just you, but like everybody on the planet and what they might think of me. Or
Yeah, that's really scary and dangerous.
So it can look like, oh, it's being compassionate, but it's not authentic compassion.
No. And it's asking someone to, it's putting undue pressure on others, but it's also not, there's no freedom in it for you.
Yeah.
Like you are, I don't know.
Yeah, you have to wrap yourself up in bubble wrap, right? What if somebody looks at me in a way that I perceive, whether it's accurate or not, as rejecting of me, or then that we give it so much weight, then it really does can sideline the person.
Yeah, and it's not okay for that person or everyone around them. It's like, I know that you thought this when you saw me, and you're like, whoa, I'm sorry, I barely know what I thought when I saw you, but it's definitely not that. Like, why would you think that's what I thought?
Right. Yeah, because what's received is received according to the mode of the receiver.
Yeah.
Right. So if my mode is not that I'm lovable, then I'm going to take the look on your face, even though it might be because you just stepped on a rock or something, and take it as being about me. Right.
Yeah, that's scary. What are ways that we can, what are ways that you found, like, what are tools to help us in this?
That goes all into the realm of what I've gone into.
Okay,
recently.
so share.
So over the years, I started noticing this pattern, and that it was, if anybody brought up an experience during a week of intensive trauma therapy that was profoundly beautiful, which you can imagine doesn't happen often, it always had to do with a profound sense of connection to God, self, or others, which now I'm coming to understand that as like a theology of relationship.
Okay.
So I'm using this fluffy term connection, but that's really what it's like getting at. And when I realized that at first, for a couple of weeks, I felt like my brain had a new toy. I really like concepts, and I was just walking around going, oh my gosh, that means that if trauma can have all these myriad ramifications in a really deleterious way, then connection has all these beautiful effects, right? And so connection is like the antithesis of trauma, and I was kind of geeking out on that. And then I thought, like, wait, like, what's connection comprised of? Like, do you just have to like kind of cross your fingers and hope there's connection in this situation, or is it more knowable than that? because if it's more knowable, then we can be more intentional about it, right? And so
I think it's more knowable. Yeah.
it is. Yeah. It's the good news.
Yeah.
So I started realizing this pattern. Again, didn't matter what demographic, age, gender, whatever a person was. The factors involved are always an experience of being chosen, directly and intentionally engaged with for yourself as an individual. And then known, which I would define as seen and heard as an individual who's very good. And then valued, which I would define as that we have an inherent dignity as based on being children of God. It's not contingent on looks, money, status, performance, productivity, whatever arbitrary metric, right? And then boundaries, right? There's a place where I stop and you start, and I don't get to come into that area unless I invite it in. And because we're body, mind, and spirit, we get boundaries in all three of those areas. And that when people are regarded and related to in ways that are like honoring of those four factors, then openness naturally happens. It just naturally happens. Even in these situations, like with adopted kids who prior to were like really walled off. And so once I noticed that, then I was just like, I was like over the moon. And then started thinking back over all the years of doing trauma therapy and thinking like, wait, the same way these are the areas for like the building blocks for like health and wholeness and wellness. Like you flip it around, and they're also the areas where brokenness happens. Like I've never processed a trauma with somebody that didn't fall into, like, wasn't a violation of one of those four things.
Okay.
Either by omission or commission.
Okay.
Right? So either they feeling chosen, but for the wrong reasons, you know, not for who they are, what somebody can get from them,
but what they can do for them. Yeah.
Or not chosen, just rejected, right? Or known, but then it's betrayed.
Right.
Or not known, just disregarded, ignored.
Yeah.
Right. Valued, but valued again, like not for their inherent dignity, valued for some arbitrary reason.
The way they look or the way they perform.
Right. And or not valued, devalued, diminished, belittled or whatever. And then boundaries. So either your boundaries are ignored or directly like violated.
Right.
So just recognizing that and then coming to like, wow, these are really the areas of how we need to relate to each other and when we do, it's like, this isn't rocket science, you know what I mean?
It seems simple. Like it seems, so, and I'm more simple-minded and I don't have any of your letters after your name or studied this, that, or the other. So in my mind, and I don't know if it's more just where I am right now is I'm really diving into like, obviously kids and babies and like just really doing some research there. And it's like the first 36 months of a child's life is when they really need that intimate connection. So I'm thinking what you're talking about with community. Okay, so a mom having a baby, like a newborn is totally dependent on you and having beautiful relationships with them, right? So I talk to a lot of young girls who are breastfeeding and they're not doing their holy hours or they're taking their prayer time and like, oh my goodness, beating themselves up because they're not doing this. I'm like, whoa, you're doing it.
Right.
Like you're looking at that face, that baby's face. That's the face of God. Like you're having that prayer time.
Your face is the face of God for that baby.
Exactly. I'm like, that is like going on. Right. And then just like taking care of them, like meeting their needs and loving them simply. Like, and I think this is true of most people, but like seeing a newborn baby, everybody, there's noises that come out of us, right? We're like, oh, like you're so cute, you're gorgeous. And I think it's their innocence and and like you want to protect it, right? Like even I've seen some like really manly, buff guys that like are working construction, but you put a baby in there. Like everything changes. They melt and they're like trying to be protective. Like everybody wants to protect that innocence. And I feel like as we grow, there's less of that. Or if there's mental illness or drug use or whatever, like that can be abused much younger. But so thinking of it as that little, as you're saying this, it's like, okay, that communion, that connection. And so it's with others, with God. What was the third?
And with ourselves.
And with ourselves. Okay.
Yeah. So the same way we need to relate to each other in that way. Then I realized like, wait, the healthiest people I know relate to themselves in ways that are honoring of those same factors, right? And I was like, whoa, wait, this is the same way the Lord relates to us. right? We tend to start on the outside with people, like, okay, do I have a general sense that this person's respectful of my boundaries? Okay, then I'll open the door a little bit, and see what they're about. Okay, do they continue to value me for who I am instead of what they can get from me? Okay, I'll open the next door a little bit, and then, being known, and then we feel like directly engaged with as an individual. Whereas the Lord starts on the inside, right? Like choosing to make us of all the possibilities of people that you have made, and then before I even formed you in the womb, I knew you. Yeah. Right.
And there's no element where he could potentially hurt us. Like he's just goodness itself, right? So like there is so much more. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Bonaventure would say, so good that like no greater good can even be conceived.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. And so once you see it, you kind of can't not see it. And then I started, so the book Fearless that I wrote during the COVID lockdown because my dog was ready to like report me to the ASPCA. Like, you got to get a hobby, like do something besides walk me 14
You're overly loving me. I'm good. I'm good. Back off.
Do something else. So I wrote that book just breaking down those factors. And as I was doing it, I was looking for like scriptures for meditation because I was 3 or 4 paragraphs of like content on each one of those, and then some discussion or reflection questions and a little journaling section and whatever. So I was looking for scriptures for meditation for each one of those aspects. And then I started realizing like, oh my goodness, like all of scripture falls into one of these categories. And so I called this friend of mine and I'm like, hey, this is what I'm realizing. And she goes, real like nonchalant, she goes, well, that figures. And
That's
I'm like,
the good news.
Why? And she's like, it's all relationship.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, there's that. Yeah, I have a degree in theology. How did I miss that?
Because you were looking for one thing. You weren't looking at the whole picture. And you're like, wait, that one thing fits. That one thing. Wait a minute. Yeah. It all fits.
Yeah. And then once you see it, you kind of can't not see it. You know? Yeah. And then if you go people watching, or if you're in a restaurant or airport or Walmart or whatever, and you're seeing where things are going really well between people, if you're able to catch enough of what's going on, like those factors are there. And if there's something that's not going right, it's because there's something in there that's being like violated.
Yeah.
Okay, at least perceived as violated.
Yes. Right. Okay. So what does that look like so I think I can see it with God, and I think you're right, from the inside out. I can see it with others. What does it look like with yourself?
Yourself, yeah. And again, I think that's like, in a lot of ways, like the hinge point, because like in the, when the lawyer asked the Lord, like, what's the greatest of the commandments? And he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. And the second one is like it. He said, love your neighbor as yourself. Yeah. Right. So like loving ourselves is like written into there. So he really connects all 3 of those into like the most important rule. And we do end up loving our neighbor as ourselves. Sometimes our poor neighbor.
Our poor neighbor. If we have a lot of negative self-talk and hatred of self.
Right. Which would be boundary violations.
Yes. Right. Boundary violations with yourself, but then you do it to your neighbor. So it's a double.
Yeah. Because that becomes your mode of operation. Yeah. Right. So I'd say boundaries with yourself would be like, self-talk is a big one, or also like overextending yourself to where you're just like frazzled all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, not having healthy boundaries. Yeah. Yeah. Of what you can do and can't do. Right. This thing that I'm doing right now is it talks about like your body bank account and your spiritual bank account, and it talks about deposits. So things that you're doing to like love your body and love like your prayer life that's really filling you up, and then withdrawals, what you're doing that costs stuff. That's great. And just being aware of that and be like, okay, yes. So I woke up this morning pretty empty. And instead of making sure I took my prayer and filling myself up or having a nice breakfast, I went into overkill mode of trying to get kids to do stuff. And I was working from a very ugly place. Right? And then I'm like, what's wrong with my kids? They're fighting with each other. I'm like, you're not normally fighting. And like, I'm so angry at them. And Matt came home and was like, oh, no, if mom ain't happy, nobody's happy. And I'm like, what do you mean if I'm not happy? And he's like, honey, I'm just going to take the kids. You can have a little downtime. And I'm like, I'm fine. And then I was like, oh gosh, I guess I'm not fine. I need to take a moment and take a deep breath. And but it's hard to see it sometimes. Yeah. Especially with yourself. I feel like you can see it in someone else better.
Yeah, I think you can too. It's like a muscle. I think the more you work it, the more you start to develop a sensitivity to Value would be another way of relate, another area that I think becomes a pitfall for people. So like either not valuing themselves or valuing themselves based on things that are arbitrary, that aren't inherent, their inherent dignity as children of God, which like, even if it seems like it works for a time, like ultimately it'll end up blowing up. So like, for example, I worked with someone once who they were extravagantly wealthy, and she valued herself based on that. And so then she perceived everybody else as valuing her based on that, and then was so paranoid she could barely have any relationships.
Oh, that's
right.
hard.
So even if it's like being good at something, right? You value yourself based on that, and so then you receive according to the mode of the receiver, right? So now I'm perceiving that everybody else values me only based on that.
Right.
And so then if that gets taken away, or if in some way like I make a mistake in that area, or then suddenly my entire, or gosh, people retire, right? And then suddenly like, no idea who they are. You know? Yeah.
Yeah. If I'm not my work, then what am I?
Right. Because that was my value instead of my dignity. Yeah. And knowing yourself too, I think. So that's the part of where it gets closer to like tuning in, where you say it's harder. It is more work in the beginning. Yeah. Yeah. Tuning in. So what do I need? But taking on really the mind of Christ towards us, and how does he see us, and the delight he sees us with. And,
yeah. I think that so much of who I see myself as is very much like it's a little kid. It's not an adult.
Yeah.
Like I know I'm an adult, but I definitely see myself as daddy's little girl, like God's little girl, like
That's
that.
awesome.
And I don't think I saw that until I was like late teens, early 20s. Yeah. And for whatever reason, like I had a lot of self-hatred and a lot of lies that I believed. And then I had really beautiful, holy people that worked me through that. I actually wrote a chapter recently. Maybe the book's called Women Made New. I don't know what it's called. So Kristalina Everett wrote a book. It's through EWTN. I can't remember the title of the book's Women Made New, but it's through her Women Made New ministry. Okay. But she had different people write different chapters. And I wrote a chapter on lies, and lies that I personally believed about myself, and just kind of my story. And then I also put truths to those lies, so, and scripture verses to fight against it, and talking about how we have to fight that. Like, and without that, like we cannot know. And so I have a very strong sense of worth. Like I know I am a daughter of God. Like that is who I am. And I'm very blessed with that, but I haven't always had it. Like it's because I hit rock bottom and like there was nothing, that all I had was like, well, I guess I'm God's little girl. Like that's all I got. And then I feel like the Lord's added more things to it, but at the core, it's still just God's little girl.
Yeah,
like that's it. He just loves me.
That's awesome.
And I don't deserve it. I don't, but like, that's who I see me as now too, and I've definitely gone through seasons of like postpartum depression or whatever, where I wasn't the nicest to me. But I never went back to that really mean, like this is, no one should treat anyone this way. Right. But even in that was like, all right, Lord, let me see the thing. Let me see me the way you see me. And it's like delighting in me. Like, I am so happy that you're loving on this baby. You are very tired. You haven't slept in 2 weeks. You have a sick baby. It's okay that you're overtired. It's okay that you don't want to get dressed. Like, this is okay. Like, it's going to be okay. You're going to make it through it, you know? And even like now with my health stuff, when I have bad days, and it's like I legit couldn't do anything today. I had to sit in like a chair with my legs up, you know? And it's like, that's okay. Like, I'm trying to love my family in it, and trying to just read more books with my kids. It's like, just get a book, bring it over. We're going to try, you know? And it's like, there's no point in beating myself up over that. No. Like, that's not going to help anyone. It won't help my family. It won't help me. It won't help the Lord, you know? And so it's like, okay, just relying on, overly relying on his goodness and listening to him. It's like, okay, I think that I know some things. I'm nowhere near as smart as God. So nowhere. Like, I don't even compete, right? Like, Matt has Peter Crave coming in town tomorrow. Peter Crave's here. He's crazy brilliant, right? My husband's pretty darn smart. He's probably here. Like, there's tons of saints. They're all in here. I'm like down on the ground. I'm like that little stink bug flying around. I am not very bright, you know, but by God's grace, he, you know, whatever. Like, but I so I can't listen to my thoughts about me.
Yes,
like the
yeah,
Lord's
yeah,
are
yeah.
so much, like he's
Right.
so much higher up,
Yeah.
right? I was like, well, my husband's telling me I'm great. Peter Craif's never told me how great I am, but I'll ask him tomorrow. But like, yeah, so I should obviously listen to the Lord that much more.
Yeah, well, you know, one of the scriptures I love, it comes up throughout the Gospels. I think it's in all the Gospels. At least I know it's in Matthew and Luke, but where the Lord tells us not to judge.
Yeah.
He doesn't say don't judge others.
He just says,
don't
judge.
judge.
Yeah.
That means like, it's above my pay grade to like figure out what makes me tick. Right.
Agreed. Yeah. And I think about even like my kids, like when they've made mistakes, especially little ones. You see a toddler who's like beating themselves up over something. Like, I spilt the Cheerios, and they're like all upset and distraught. Yeah. And it's like, whoa, look at me. Yeah. Am I crying? I'm not crying. Guess what? You're okay. I still love you. You could spill all the Cheerios in the whole world, and I will still love you. We have a dustpan. Let's just clean it up together. Like, I know how to fix this problem. You know?
When you said that coming to that understanding of yourself as daddy's little girl, like in your 20s, I'm thinking like, wow, you're way ahead of me, because it wasn't until I was in my 30s or 40s. The way I always think about it is when you get to that place with the Lord, I always think like it's never too late to have a great childhood. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Oh, yeah. You could start it at 33. Well, you also said 33 is when you started your studies. Well, that's when I went through trauma therapy.
Okay, but isn't that cool? Like, you started your Jesus year.
It was definitely the crucifixion, that was for sure.
But have you heard people say, like, their 33rd year, like, having their Jesus year? So Bob Lesnesky drank nothing but water, for that whole year. And I have some other friends that, like, gave up alcohol or different things, but, like, their Jesus year. Because, like, they're 33, and they're like, so I love that you started trauma therapy that year. And the Lord's like, all right, I'm going to use this. Yeah. And that it's overflowing, it's changing, you know, but I love, I love this community aspect. And I also just like focusing on the good too. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, no offense to trauma, but trauma's pretty bad.
And well, it's the same way. I think I'm kind of geared more the same way from a physical perspective. Like, I'd rather focus on eating clean and eating well and cutting out the junk and supplements and exercise and sleep and hydrate and all of those things, instead of focusing on taking a bunch of medications. You know what I mean? Yeah. So
with the list of side effects this long.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, great, okay, so you got rid of that one problem I had, but you just gave me 10 more. And it's like, well, take these.
To solve those. Yes. Yeah. But we can do the same thing in the emotional, spiritual dimension of focusing on those things in terms of how we relate because the Lord relates to us in those ways, but we're called to relate to Him in those ways as well. Right. And so the more we focus on those 4 things, like I like it when it's simple because it's easier to remember.
You can follow it. You're like, wait, hold on. My nutrition, I'm seeing this doctor in Columbus, and they have like a nutrition plan for me. I'm on step 14B right now. And not every day, I do my pills like 1 week at a time, but it's like all these supplements. And I have to re-get out the sheet, and I'm like, oh gosh, how much magnesium, how much liver detox, what was that? And it's complicated. Yeah. And I appreciate it. And sometimes medical stuff has to be complicated. But like, why have 14B points when you can have 4? Right. Okay, so go over the 4 again. Go over the 4 again.
So that we're chosen. Okay. And so relating to ourselves in that way, the Lord relates to us in that way, relating to each other. Chosen, known, valued, and boundaries. Okay. And then openness is a byproduct. And I think a lot of times people try to make an end run for openness. Like, I want openness in this relationship. Well, are you relating to a person in those ways? Like, if you are, we're made for connection. Okay.
Chosen, known,
valued,
and boundaries.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, there's actually, this was done, I believe, back in the 1980s. My brain is very much big picture. I'm bad at details, but I think it was in the 80s. I believe they were Canadian psychologists, but they did this experiment, the Rat Park experiment.
I was born in the 80s. I don't know. I don't think little kid Cameron remembers this. Sorry.
So it's called the Rat Park experiment, and you can find it online right up to that. And so rats are pack animals. Yes. And so that becomes important because we're pack animals too. We're born into families.
We're just way better looking than them. No offense to the rats, but.
Hopefully. And so there were these 2 kind of houses, 2 like Hyde Park of ratdom or whatever that they had. There were these 2 And both of the setups had, a ball pit and wheels and whatever a rat can dream of in their home. And both of them, both of these houses had 2 water sources, a pure water source and a heroin laced water source.
Oh, wow.
And as long as the rats were in there with the other rats and had connection, they always drank from the pure water source. Right? And when they were taken out and put in isolation, they always drank from the heroin laced water source. And even when they were taken back and put back with their pack, they would put themselves through detox. They would go through all of the detox
and just drink the pure water.
And drink the pure water because they'd rather experience the connection, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
Is there any distinction between the heroin water and the pure water? Like, is there anything like visually that looks different?
No, my understanding it was just.
Wow.
So I had heard,
and then even as they went through detox.
Yeah, even the suffering that it wasn't just like, oh, this is blissful, and you just change off of this. Wow. There was a cost to it, Yeah. So I'd heard Dr. Vincent Folletti, he's an MD who did the ACEs study, Adverse Childhood.
I just heard of it for the first time. I just took it.
Yeah. And so I heard him speak up in Akron a number of years ago.
My trainer was from Akron. Yeah. I'll tell you her name later.
I was going to say.
We'll talk about it later.
Yeah. And he was talking about addiction and what we try to do to self-medicate for pain, basically. And think of addiction that way, not necessarily substance or alcohol. But I love this quote. He said, "You can never get enough of what almost works."
Yeah.
Isn't that like one of those, like, it's so profound, it's simple?
It is. It's so simple, it's profound. Yeah.
Yeah. And yet how many times do we do that? Like, without connection, healthy connection, we go off in all kind of directions trying to satisfy for that. And it ends up being pseudo connection, like pornography or addiction or social media, or things like that, where we just like, we can't get enough.
Or where we think we're getting community by social media or going online, finding groups, whatever. And then it's like, this is not
authentic.
It's not authentic.
Right.
Yeah. I talk to so many women that they're just starved for true community.
Yeah.
And it's like, you can't substitute that.
Right. Yeah.
You can't have a great Facebook group. I have a Facebook page. I'm not saying you ladies aren't beautiful. You are, but it's nothing to compare to. I have a Marco Polo women's group. So we're video messaging each other, and that's amazing and awesome. And it's so much greater than the Facebook group, but still that fails in comparison as face to face.
Right.
Like sitting down and like what we're doing right now. Like this is so much greater, like actually having a drink, looking at each other, like this is, and some aspects it feels fake because we have these big lights and a camera pointed at us, but it's still so much greater. And then,
but we have the stink bugs flying.
We do have the stink bugs. Well, they just desire community. They just they want to be close to us. They just,
it's beautiful.
They can tell.
They're acting this out for us. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Maybe they're pack animals too.
Maybe.
Okay. So back to the ACE test. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah,
Sorry.
ACEs test. I was just saying the quote from him, you can never get enough of what almost works. Yeah. And so then Johan Hari has a TED Talk. He was a British journalist who did a TED Talk on addiction. He greatly researched substance abuse. And to that same point about connection, at the end of his TED Talk, he says the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Because it's what we're made for, right? And so then we stop trying to self-medicate in these other ways. And
I've, in my experience, people that are trying to quit or get clean for the sake of getting clean or quitting don't. But when they're doing it for the sake of their marriage or their children, then they do. It's that community motivation. Right. That you want this thing that you don't want to lose.
Right. This is more important.
This is way more important than that. Yeah.
And more satisfying. And
yes. Yeah. Oh, wow. Interesting.
Yeah. So I'll go a little bit on the biology.
Okay. Do it.
Okay. So there's Dr. Stephen Porges is a neuroscientist. And I was just going through his material a couple of months ago because we have to do continuing education as therapists. So he talks about the brain and trauma and everything. And he talks about the 3 systems in the body, the 3 basic systems that we operate out of. And so the first one is vagus vagal. And in the vagus vagal system, we that's where we connect. That's where we have that authentic experience of connection and just, you know, how it feels when that happens, right? And then the second system is the sympathetic nervous system. That's when we're in fight or flight.
Yeah.
Right. We know what that feels like. And then the third one is dorsal vagal. And in the dorsal vagal system, when we're in that space, that's when we're so overwhelmed we shut down.
Okay.
So that's really big bad kind of place. And he says the other thing that stimulates the vagus vagal besides connection is ingestion.
Oh, interesting.
And I was like, whoa, like think about what we do to try to satisfy for that. Like a baby sucking their thumb.
Yeah.
Or
chocolate.
Yeah. Or smoking or drinking.
Yeah.
Right? Then a couple of days went by and all of a sudden out of nowhere, I was like, okay, that's all. And of course, my mental health brain goes there. But then I thought of all the ways the Lord chose to remain with us was in a way where we ingest him.
Isn't that amazing? Cool? Yeah.
Even knowing that, like, what a small percentage of the world would ever even know, but on a biological level, he's even wiring us for connection with himself. Yeah. I just thought that was like,
well, I love it too in the Eastern Catholics, like the very first food a baby receives is the milk of its mother. The second food is the body and blood of Christ.
That's awesome.
Like, isn't that amazing?
That's awesome. Yeah.
Like, none of my kids did that. Well, Peter received when he was a baby. I mean, he was like 1.5. He was almost 2 actually. But I love that. Like seeing these moms come and bringing their babies. Right. And oftentimes they were just feeding them and then bring them up for communion. Wow. And it's like,
that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Unless you eat my flesh, he knows. Like, this is how you'll get. Yeah.
And
then water. If you had known who was asking you for water, I could give you water that'll last for eternity. Right. Yeah, you don't even have a bucket. What are you talking about? But also something that we consume.
Yeah, definitely.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And then I think also just community. I think there's something to like breaking bread with someone. We went over a friend's house for dinner last night and it was just so good to just chat with them and put our guards down and just enjoy. And I can't have bread, but you know, we broke a ham and vegetables and we made a lovely salad. It's good, but it's like that level of intimacy. Like when you've shared a meal with someone, you're so much greater friends and
there's a bonding.
That happens with that. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah,
I've never heard that before.
Because think like the Lord could have picked any way. We're just used to, it's the Eucharist and this, we know, but he could have picked anything, right? Yeah. Any way to remain with us. And I just think it's so cool that it's a way we ingest him.
Yeah.
And what that does in the body. It's like really, So the connection stuff or theology of relationship is kind of what it's like. Kind of evolved into.
I like it.
Yeah.
Theology of relationship. Okay. So what are you going to be doing with this? How will you be helping people? You said you're going to do more parish type stuff?
Yeah. So been doing healing retreats and going out second weekend in November to a parish to do a parish healing mission. So like Friday evening, Saturday. Looking to do more of those and speaking on this. Actually, a process of possibly going back and getting a PhD so I can like develop this theology of relationship.
Nice.
Yeah, because I only have a little baby theology degree. I don't need some like bigger muscles.
Okay, you can get bigger muscles. That's fine.
That's right. You know,
I'm still in the undergrad training wheel stage, so
it's more important to know him than to know theology.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. Well, and my thing was when Matt and I got married, I was probably only like a semester away from graduating. Oh, wow. And I had stage 4 endometriosis. I knew that before we met. And I was like, nope, my priority is making a baby. Yeah, I have time to figure out and finish my degree later. Sure. Like, I don't need a degree right now. Yeah. I can get a degree anytime. My clock is ticking and my body is not healthy and I want to have babies. Yeah. And the opportunity happened for us to move to Ireland. And then it just hasn't been
the right time.
It hasn't been the right time, you know? And I'm like, when and if, that's fine. Right. But right now, I'm fine not doing that. And yeah. I think studying later is, at least for me, I was a late bloomer and kind of everything. So it's different than when you're, for me, than when I was younger. I feel like even when I started university, I had done net 2 years prior. Okay. So I was an older college student. I mean, I was like 19 or 20,
right.
but that was older, you know,
Yeah.
compared to
Yeah,
my
it's true.
18-year-old classmates. And there was a huge difference even then.
Yeah.
Just between 2 years.
Sure.
It was like there was so much difference. There was another guy at my university that was a couple years older too. I think he was 21 and I was 20. And it was so apparent in the class.
Sure.
Like there would be moments that like I would look at him and we'd both look at the professor and we're like, oh my goodness, they have no idea.
Right.
Like they have no idea. But I think
Yeah.
there's something to being that, like you're a little kid, your parents are taking care of you, you move into a dorm room, now university professors are taking, the dorm dad's taking care of you, whatever, you know, and you're just kind of still until you experience life in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that maybe the most profound thing I've noticed over all the years of doing therapy is you can't give people answers to questions they haven't yet asked, right? And so, and by this age, like I've asked a lot of questions, whereas like at that age, it was just kind of like, okay, what do you want me to learn? What do you want me to take in? You know what I mean? And we have questions that we're really hungry for, for the answers to, then it's different. I think we study differently. And I just wouldn't have been ready anyway. It was only in the last few years that all of this kind of like, oh, I want to study for this. I've always kind of shied away from the title doctor. I don't know. It's my bias, because sometimes I think PhDs can tend to try to explain things in the most complicated way possible.
Yeah. My thing is, if you can't bring it down to my level, then you don't really understand it yourself. Like you've got to communicate it to me. If you can't,
that's right.
Yeah. And I think there's also was it? I'm trying to remember if it was Bob Rice, someone recently who, they've had a doctorate, I think, for a while, but someone was talking about, I don't know if it was him or not, but my husband was asking, are you going to change, your license to that? And they were like, no, combination of it costs money and I couldn't be bothered. And I don't want to be the dude on the airplane that they like call and like, oh, they run to my seat like, you're a doctor. We need you to come. And you're like, CPR. I'm sorry, it's theology or philosophy.
I can pray with them.
This is not helpful. No, he's like, if you're medical, please change your title, like volunteer, go out. Yeah. I've been in situations where like, someone like is having a medical something and I jump in to help. And then it turns out like, I'm like CPR certified. Like that's it. Bare minimum here, right? But I'm like, someone's in need. I'm going to help. Yeah. And I'll like start to like get someone ready to do CPR or whatever. Wow. I'm like, is there a nurse or a doctor? Someone's like, I'm a doctor. I'm like, what the heck am I doing this? Come over here and help out. Like I actually was giving CPR to someone and then I was looking and asking and someone's like, I can't remember if they're a doctor or a nurse, but they were like, if you need help, I'm a nurse or I'm a doctor. And I'm like, yes, I am a college student. You definitely should be doing this.
Good for you for jumping in there though. That's awesome.
I don't think I act, it's just one of those like, okay, see a need, fill it. And then maybe later realize, there was other people that could have filled that need. It's like, someone else step forward. But speaking of questions, feel free to put questions over here, everyone that's watching live. And I will just scroll through a little bit and see. Hiya from Ireland, Ashling, hello. Hi from Galway. Yay, we've got Irish people on here. Hi Margaret, do you have any knowledge on how to deal with ADHD in women? I have ADD, and but I think I was diagnosed before they started putting H's in it because I was diagnosed in like the 90s or something. So I'm sure I'm ADHD.
Yeah. So my area of expertise is really trauma. Sometimes trauma or ADD or ADHD can be a trauma response. So in those cases, and the reason being that we have use-dependent development of the brain. Okay. So whatever we do a lot of, we get good at. Okay. Right. And so think especially when we're kids and we go through trauma, and what resources do we have for coping? A lot of times it's just think about something else, think about something else.
Go. Stay busy. And then you don't have
so
to
we get really good at thinking about something else. Right. So, so if it's trauma related, then trauma treatment can help with ADD or ADHD. But other than that,
have you seen that?
I have. Yeah. It's almost like proverbial. You expect somebody to come in with I think especially like in little kids, it'll, the diagnosis will be ADD or ADHD. And as adults, I think a lot of times the diagnosis will end up being anxiety. Not that they're not two different things, but sometimes I think
Okay,
they
interesting.
present the same kind of way. Like,
Yeah, I remember I was put on like crazy strong doses of Ritalin, and I was a zombie when I took it. And so, for the time I was in, I think first grade, and I think I was prescribed it probably all the way through junior high, but I stopped taking it probably in fourth grade because I hated the way it made me feel.
Yeah.
And I had a Ritalin bush out front, and hindsight, I didn't know you could sell this stuff. I just spit my pills out in the bush. I put it in my mouth, pretend like I swallowed it, go out, spit it out, because my mom would make me take it in front of her. And I remember being in class, and I remember like moving, and I'm like, don't move, or they'll know, don't move. And it was pure willpower that I sat still and tried to pay attention. And like my whole body, like it took like every ounce. But when I was on the medicine, I was a zombie.
Oh, wow.
Like, so at recess, I wouldn't play.
Oh,
like, I loved running and playing soccer, and I wouldn't play. Or I'd even think of things to say. Like, the teacher would ask the question. I'm like, but I couldn't be bothered raising my hand.
Wow.
Like, I was just like, I know it was way overdosed. Like, I don't know what the dosing was, but it, like, zombified me.
Wow.
But it was pure, like, willpower that I didn't...
Yeah.
Like, I had to act in a way that they wouldn't know.
Yeah.
And I'm horrible at studying, especially like in a quiet room, like sitting in the quiet. And so I'd always study in the Adoration Chapel. And that was the only time I felt that I could like be still enough to like really gain all the info.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
So I like self-medicated with Jesus.
With Jesus, nice.
You know? So I feel like there's a lot worse things you could self-medicate with.
Yeah.
He's a really good study partner.
Yeah. I think I was ADD or ADHD, I'm not sure which, but I was really, really shy when I was a little kid. And so...
Were you?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Probably like social phobic.
Okay.
If anybody had been paying any attention.
They didn't notice.
I would cry every day before school till fifth grade. So yeah, it was probably social phobic. But I would sneak M&Ms. It was Catholic school, right? I would sneak M&Ms into the class. And I would tell myself, like, the clock is right, like, every 5 minutes, if I'm good, I can have an M&M.
Oh, like, you brought yourself an
M&M.
M&M.
My little reward. Yeah.
I use reward
I
for
felt
me.
like I was
for sure
going to crawl out of my skin.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Very different things, but same idea. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Someone's asking, can you talk about trauma in the life of someone with mental illness, such as autism, bipolar? Can it cause bipolar or its symptoms? You kind of touched on that a little bit.
Yeah, for a while I would say. Now, of course, I'm not saying that bipolar is not a legitimate diagnosis, but it very much can be read as trauma. For me, I was misdiagnosed bipolar. And even though I'm looking at the diagnostic criteria going, I have never been manic or hypomanic. I don't know why you people keep diagnosing me with this. And but it was kind of like I was having extreme anxiety and extreme depression. So they were like going, oh, two different poles, but that's not what bipolar is.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and it was kind of the diagnosis du jour
at the
for
time.
a while.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then did they put you on medication for bipolar? Did it help? Did it?
No, and I still have a tremor. You want to see my tremor? Like. Yeah,
wow.
So you notice I've been drinking with my left hand. Yeah. I think because all the psychotropic drugs for 7 years.
Wow.
Yeah, because I was misdiagnosed. So I was on some heavy duty stuff because what they do when mood disorder, which bipolar would be, doesn't respond to mood stabilizers is they combine it with antipsychotics to try to boost the mood stabilizing properties of the mood stabilizers. But I was on some heavy duty stuff.
Yeah.
But because I didn't have it, it didn't work. And so they just kept increasing it until finally.
And then did you eventually get a therapist that said, you're right, this isn't what you have?
Yeah, well, once I went through trauma therapy, and then the anxiety went away, the depression went away, and so yeah.
That just like proves like you have to be your own advocate.
Yeah.
Like you got to keep fighting.
Yeah. Especially in the mental health field, because like for me, it felt very much like I was in a glass bubble that it didn't matter like how loud I pounded and shouted, like nobody was listening. And because people are scared of liability, right? And
and that's fair.
Fair because we're in a litigious society, right? And so they would just kind of glaze over and look at she's been on these medications for this long, and they would just write me another prescription because they don't want me dying on their watch. And I was really suicidal. But it wasn't helping, and I know because it was coming out of me in the same way it was going in.
Yeah, interesting.
So it wasn't even breaking down. And it wasn't helping. Yeah. And so, but then the symptoms went away, and yeah.
Praise God.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, praise God. Like, that's so great. I love God's healing. Like, he is so good.
He's
right?
a way better trauma therapist than I am.
Right? Seriously, he is the best. Hi from Germany. Looks and sounds great. Trolls. I'll delete them after. This is better. Excuse me. Excuse me. Okay. Da 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 da. I think people can be addicted to certain emotions. I know people who seem to attract drama and always thrive on others' dramas. If I call the EastEnders mentality. East End is a soap opera. Yes, I remember East End. Yeah, I don't know if it's British or Irish. Yeah, so, yeah, what do you think of that? People pulling on more, like people just attracting drama and thriving, not necessarily thriving in it, but like,
yeah, no, I
wanting
think that's,
drama.
I mean, I think I was honestly not wanting it in a conscious, intentional way, but I think I would have been was in that spot. I think I can say that. And so you have to understand, like, if you understand the biology of trauma, it makes a little more sense, right? Because of the way the traumatic experiences become encoded in the brain, they continue to be experienced. Like, they're still going on. Even physiologically.
Yeah, so you're constantly stuck in that fight mode, right? Even though there's not a threat. Right. So it's great for you to be in a fight mode when there's a bear in the room, but it really sucks when there's not a bear in the room. Right. Because you're still in that fight.
Exactly. And I think it's the most natural thing in the world for us to want our insides and our outsides to match. Yes. You know?
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And so I think it's natural to try to, unwittingly and intentionally or whatever, but to try to, I remember even at times before treatment thinking, this sounds really, and I just thought, wow, am I a nut? Like, I'm not even going to tell anybody this, but like, almost like wanting like a catastrophe to happen. You know? I mean, like, I know I really don't want it, but at the same time, there's something about, you know.
Yeah, I had a time that I was praying with a friend of mine and talking about when I was little, Hurricane Hugo. It was a Category 5 hurricane, hit South Carolina. Were you in Georgia then? Coastal Georgia? It was, I think it was like, oh gosh, I don't know. I was probably like late 80s.
Yeah. Well, I came up to Steuben,
maybe early 90s
in
or late 80s.
Yeah, so 87 on, I was up here.
Okay, well, I don't remember the year. I could probably look it up. But it was the first really bad. I think it was Category 4 when it hit land. And took out, I think Savannah got hit too, really? But I lived in just outside of Charleston, and we had like the eye of the storm went right through. And I remember multiple things, like there was moments that I slept through the storm, and then I remember like I wanted to watch through the window. Like I wanted to see it all. And my mom was trying to like keep us all safe and like keep us in the tub and nobody move or whatever, you know, like we've got to stay. Wow. And I just wanted to watch it. And I found it fascinating. And even like we had a boat, my dad would take us out on the boat. And if a storm hit, my mom would freak out and want us all down in the cabin where it's safe. And I wanted to sit on the bow and just embrace it. I'm like, this is awesome. Yeah. And I just loved it. I'm like, I saw the beauty in the storm, but I wonder if part of it was like the chaos. It was like, okay, this is how I feel on the inside. So this makes more sense. Yeah. And my mom said I would run through the house like a tornado. Like, oh, what's wrong with you? Like, why can't you just go at a normal speed? And I wonder if that's part of it.
I think that's really natural. Okay. I still want to, like to the same point, I think a lot of times when I'm working with somebody who's been through a lot of sexual abuse, they'll stay addicted to sexual things. And I think that there's that same wanting the inside and the outside to match. Yeah. You know? Because it gets a lot easier once the traumas are processed. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. And then I also heard with what was the AD, the score, the test, the trauma test, the
store?
No. There's a test we did. It was called not AD, but ADIS. You said it earlier.
Oh, ACEs?
ACEs. That's it.
Adverse childhood experiences.
Yes, there you go. They said if you have a 4 or more, like it's crazy the effects. Yeah. Like you're more likely to die sooner. Yeah. You're more likely to get cancer. Mm-hmm. You're more likely. I don't even remember all the things, but it was a lot of stuff.
The wear and tear of stress on the body. You know, it's like taking out and driving your little Datsun like it's a Ferrari. You know. Yeah. Like can't sustain that because like I don't know, before I started doing trauma work, to me, it was almost like, it felt kind of like emotions are in iCloud somewhere, like they're out there. I'm just thinking these things but then when you realize they're taking place in here, like
Yeah.
it's affecting this machine,
Yeah.
then it's different to understand that.
Yeah, it's a little more like, okay, I do want to take care of it because I
Right,
don't want
right.
to be,
Yeah.
Yeah,
you can't just
shutting
decide.
down. And,
yeah. Right. Yeah, it's going to have myriad consequences.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you choose not, like, there's no not feeling anger. It's like you numb one emotion, you numb them all.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There's no, I'm just going to focus on joy.
Right,
and,
right.
just not have the bad stuff.
Right.
It's like, you can't do that.
That would be like if they had a Novocaine that, like, only numbed you from pain, and then you could still feel...
Yes, still feel your face.
Right?
Yeah, and not have that half smile that you're like, drooling. I went to the dentist, just, we can tell. We see it. Yeah, it affects all of it. Okay, yeah, let's see what else. I've been told I have PTSD from my husband having a heart attack at home. I was unable to save him. Oh, God bless you. I'm so sorry. He passed away 12/12/2021. Oh, I'm so sorry. That is rough. Yeah. Do you want to touch on a little PTSD?
Yeah. So PTSD is, like, I think the most common for the longest time, I think it was what everybody kind of concluded. If somebody has been affected by trauma, they must have post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's definitely one of the things that a person could have. And the three main kind of cluster of symptoms for those are avoidance. We tend to avoid things that are reminders of the event. Hypervigilant, where you stay kind of like keyed up around anything that's a reminder. And re-experiencing. So those... like replaying it in your head type thing? Yeah, or when you're around reminders, like you're re-experiencing those emotions or operating out of those emotions, like they're still going. Okay. Yeah, so that's very common. But they're actually, like, there's a slew of diagnoses that, when you trace them back down to their roots, really comes back to trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so people that are watching that are like, well, it's very apparent I have trauma. Like, what are other things? Like, obviously try to find a trauma therapist, but other than that, like, I think being aware. Like, what are some concrete things they can do?
Yeah. I think gosh, I hesitate to say that. Isn't it funny? Like, because I'm not trying to sell a book, but people have read the first book that I wrote, and it's a real explanation of trauma based on case studies. And people have told me, like, that itself helped them just understanding, like, where their symptoms were coming from.
Yeah.
A friend's daughter told me that just from reading it and understanding where her fear of driving after an accident came from, then she was able to go, oh, then that doesn't mean that response I'm having is somehow fundamentally, like, true. So I can choose other than that.
Yes.
And did, and then, like, was
praise God.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, that's pretty cool. So I think educating yourself on I
think my camera may have gone off. Our volume's still on, so you can keep talking.
Okay, so just educating yourself on the effects of trauma. And because I think in a lot of ways what that does is, and I think this is really, like, key, it helps us understand our symptoms as how we're doing instead of who we are.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So it really goes to, like, because the effects of trauma can be physiological and emotional and cognitive and relational, and then therefore because of relational, spiritual, and just on and on and on, then it can end up feel so all-encompassing that it feels like it's who I am. It's essential to my nature. I'm somehow fundamentally broken, right? But if you understand those things and where they're coming from, then
there's hope.
There's and healing. You can understand your identity is not...
And you're not alone, too. Like, I think that's part of it, right? Like, Satan owns whatever is in the dark. So I think even just reading someone else's story or reading and being like, okay, wait, so you went through this too. Like, okay, so I can find healing. I can, and this isn't my fault. It's not who I am. It's,
Yeah, and it's a very normal response to very unfortunate circumstances.
Yeah.
It's like if I was if I was walking out of this room and like banged my knee into the door jamb and it turned purple, I would be like, oh my gosh, I'm such a mess. I mean, my knee's even purple. Like, be like, that's what they do when you do that to them.
Yeah, you banged it in the door. It's
right.
okay. There will be a
Yeah, this isn't your identity.
No.
Yeah.
But I think it can feel like it, especially when when the emotions do get really big and feeling like you're drowning in them. Right. It's like, okay, let's find the help. I think also journaling is huge. Like, I know when I was in a place just suffering from postpartum depression, a friend of mine said, just write down your blessings, write down things that you're thankful for. Because when I felt like there was a dark cloud over my head, I didn't see all the little joys. Yeah. And it's like, I naturally did before, but that I didn't after. So even saying like, I love the different shades of green in this plant. Like, it's so beautiful. I love this relationship, having this conversation, you know, like big things, but also little things like colors, or little things like they put just the right amount of, you know, grapefruit in this drink, and it's lovely. Like, and then filling, because then I feel like it's also filling your mind with these positive things. So it's not just the negative going over and over. Like, you got to break the cycle, and you got to stop hearing.
Yeah. And also, like, as we talked about before, like really taking on the mind of Christ for you. And, you know, always look at it like, if the Lord and I disagree, I'm the one who's wrong.
Yeah, totally.
You know? Thank God.
Yeah.
Literally. But so marinating in how he sees us and how he delights in us and how he loves us, and then beginning to really internalize that and relate to yourself in the same way, even if it's like 1,000 degrees of difficult, but still making that.
Yeah. Like, fighting through it and being like, and then even like the beauty is you don't have to do it on your own. Yeah. So even just saying like, all right, Lord, I need you to give me the grace just to try to let me see me the way you see me. Right. And just listen to it, you know? Yeah, that's huge. Well, thank you so much. I've enjoyed this chat. Thank you everyone for joining us. There's a bunch more stuff, but I don't know that we'll get into it because I feel like we've been going for a while. Yeah. I will put your website, your books, all the links. If you just want to email them to me, I'll add them in the list underneath so everyone can see it. But thank you so much. It's been great. Yeah. Enjoy. All right. God bless everyone. Bye-bye.